Okay, welcome to the Node.js Technical Steering Committee meeting for April 8th, 2021. We'll follow the agenda that was in the issue within the TSC repo. Before we get to that though, does anybody have any announcements that they'd like to share?
We should mention the security updates that came out 2 days ago.
That sounds good.
I'll take the minutes,
yeah,
Michael.
Yeah, sorry, okay, yeah, it's okay, yes. Security notes, they went out. The details, there's both on the website, there's a link for the details, and it also went out to the Node.js Sec mailing list in case you want to make sure you get an email when that happens. That's a good one. Any other announcements that people have?
Probably that there's not long to go until Node.js 16 comes out, and the proposal's open. The last release candidate expected to be next week. There have been a few majors that were pulled in technically after the cutoff. So I've linked those. So if any TSC members have any objections to those, please make them known and we can open reverts.
And that's probably also a good reminder to everybody that if you're still using Node.js 10, it's going to go end of life, end of April as well. So be good to, if you haven't already, to better start looking at how you move off onto one of the newer LTSs. Any other announcements people have to share?
Is Node 10 going EOL at the end of April or the end of June?
I think officially it goes on end of April.
Okay.
And then, yeah, I'm pretty, correct me if I'm wrong, Bethany, but.
Yeah, I'm fairly sure it's April. Node 15, I think, will go end of life in June.
Right, yeah, our currents, we give a little bit more time. Okay, so if that's our announcements, we'll move on to CPC and board meeting updates. I don't have anything top of mind from the CPC or the board. And we don't have Mary, our CPC rep, so maybe we'll move on to the issues. So go ahead.
I was just going to mention we do have in the TSC repo a pull request with charter changes. So if people haven't looked at that, it might be a good idea to take a quick look at it because they might matter to you. And that can't land until the CPC approves it.
Yep, good point. And I guess it's also, I don't know if we've mentioned it in a meeting before, but it's good to mention that Mary was reelected as the TSC's CPC rep. So thanks to her for doing that for another year. So moving on to the issues tagged for the agenda. The first one is mark callback-based FS API as legacy. I don't know if anybody's been deeply involved in that one. See who marked it for the, I see, Matteo, you've certainly commented on it. And it was mentioned that this is mark callback-based FS API as legacy.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I think Tobias has mapped the topic extremely well. So the last comment of Tobias is represent exactly my sentence, my thinking here. So, which it's like I put a minus R -1 because it's using callbacks and async await together. It's a sure recipe for blowing things up. So if we mark those as legacy, we will be essentially encouraging people of mixing them up. And that it's not something that I think we should be doing.
Right, we're not. Go ahead.
I just have a quick comment on this. I haven't been that deep in that issue, but one problem with the callback API as it is today is it's fundamentally unsafe. So if you close a file descriptor and then use it in a operation afterwards, the behavior is undefined. This problem does not exist with the promise API because we protect against that undefined behavior. But using the callback API as it is today is actually unsafe. It has undefined behaviors if you're using it incorrectly.
Does that qualify for being called as a legacy API?
Well, it's I think it's a motivation.
One of the
Why it
wider
might be a good
questions I
idea.
had is around the legacy, the stability index legacy. I know it's landed recently, but has that been sufficiently ratified by the users to, to know what exactly the set of APIs that qualify for that, and it's fully reciprocated by the wider ecosystem? Is it a fair idea to qualify more APIs to that set before we get a good feedback from the user base? My short question is, isn't it too early to put it in that list?
That's my gut feel too, is like, I think to Mateo's point and Tobias's one there, it's like, we're not quite ready to, if we said all of the all the callbacks were legacy, that would potentially make sense. But the mixing and having it only sort of being halfway there, I'm not sure personally that we're ready. I guess the question is on the next steps here. Like, do we think we're working towards an agreement or resolution in the issue itself? I guess it's the, or I guess even from here, what do we do in terms of discussion to move it forward in terms of feedback? Do we want to, like, we can ask more of the TC members to chime into the issue. We could, I guess we don't have, go ahead.
It seems like, so there's a foot gun that Robert brought up. There's a foot gun in the API that's that in the callback based API. Putting that aside for just a moment, it seems like there's consensus that maybe consensus isn't the right word, but it seems that there is a reasonable opinion that we shouldn't mark this as legacy yet, because we don't have everything in place so that people can just use promises and not mix it with callbacks and so on and so forth. Am I understanding the position correctly? If so, then it seems like we don't need more discussion. It seems like this marking as legacy is something that we're not ready to do yet, and we can do it at a later date. But maybe I'm misunderstanding some subtleties. Like maybe will never be the case that you can, just switch to promises and not have callbacks mixed in somewhere. And
this is where the problem lies, Rich. So I don't see a good timeline. So the hard problem is that we have a lot of, we have certain subsystems in Node that are really callback heavy. And mainly because they're really entrenched into an old way of structuring code. And it's not super easy to disentrench them from those APIs. So that is the main problem, and it's what leaves me a little bit. That leaves me wondering when this will happen. Okay, so the major ones that are missing are all the networking parts. So, and it's not that is a small amount of work to ship those. So, and not that, so by the way, we are working on it in the sense of for the wall of HTTP, we are doing Undici for various reasons, including supporting promises. So, and that will be supported out of the box. So, but it's still like, it's work that needs to happen over time. Okay. And then there is the whole thing around node streams, which are entrenched even in C++. And the question of what we do with them, especially on net, TLS, on net and TLS. So those are the key questions. I know James is working as plans, but I don't know where those are. So yeah, that's, you know, essentially that's the James now. Sorry, I didn't mention the surname. So that's I don't know. That's the situation. So I just wanted to point out it's far in the future. It's probably far in the future.
So I mean, unless we're prepared to, I mean, I don't know that we need a path forward to marking something as legacy. I mean, maybe it's just like it's not time right now, and that's okay. We don't have to like resolve this. We don't have to vote on it or anything. It's just not time. And sorry, it would be nice if we could. And then we you know, we could think about what we want to do about the undefined, you know, close the file descriptor and use it, and what happens, nobody knows. I mean,
that's Rich. We discussed that. It's part of the reason that the FS APIs were done was one. The first done was what Jerry said. Mm-hmm. So it's essentially unsafe, and it's true.
Right, and so I mean, you know, conceivably, you know, yeah, and so I mean, but we, you know, and either there's, you know, maybe there's something we can do about it, or maybe there isn't anything that can be done about it. A breaking change or something. But even if there isn't something to be done about it, if, you know, if we're not ready if we're not ready to tell people to stop using callbacks, you know, in their FS APIs, then that's the status of things, on, you know, for better or worse.
Yeah, I think the only thing I see is that there are a few TSC members who +1 who aren't here, so I'm not sure we can say that the consensus is that it's too early.
Well,
yeah.
Let's leave it on the agenda. You know, unfortunately, or, you know, I mean, maybe if you want a path forward, maybe the thing to do is for somebody to reach out in email or other back channel. You know, because I don't know. It would be nice to be able to get resolution on this that's not in a meeting, because, you know, we're having trouble getting critical mass attending the meetings right now, yeah, and if we're at an impasse in the issue tracker, maybe we need to go about it some other way. But someone has to champion that. So,
before moving on, just a question: do we have any way to, you know, encourage or discourage users from using certain APIs without deprecating or calling them legacy?
No, I mean, legacy was basically invented for that reason recently.
It's the reason, for example, the reason for legacy is the typical example is the URL parser. So the old URL parser, it's really problematic in all sorts of ways. It's a security foot gun at its best. It had multiple security vulnerabilities in the past, and something that probably should not be. Like, I will not trust it to be spec compliant in terms of how a URI is. URL is structured. So, and that was the reason. We can't remove it, but if we could, we would. But we can't.
But in this case, is there anyone that disagrees that we would like users to use the promise-based APIs when possible?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that
for the benefit of people watching on the stream, there's some chatter in the chat. Nikita and Tobias have both suggested that we can emphasize the promise APIs in the docs, that we've done that in the past. We might also want to consider, if it's possible, I don't know if it's possible, but emitting a warning, not on the use of a callback and not on closing a file descriptor, but if there's some heuristic that would, you know, allow us to emit a warning when someone is probably about to do something that would result in undefined behavior, that would be nice. But I don't have a good answer for how to do that.
Because one of the problems I see here is if we want people to go towards the promise-based APIs, and we already know that today, then I mean we'll never get there if we never do anything to encourage that. I mean, part of the problem here is that people are still using callback-based APIs.
Certainly the documentation seems like a good first step, if nothing else, right? Like in the documentation, it can have a little bit more of an explanation around, well, you know, it makes sense except for maybe if you're already using callbacks, right?
If we still had an ecosystem group of some kind, they could, you know, like we could work with them to get like pull, and maybe we don't need an ecosystem group to do this, but get, you know, pull requests into popular packages or something. Not necessarily like packages that get a lot of use, but packages that are used for instruction or that people pull examples from. I don't know. I'm trying to think of something here, but Tobias is saying in the chat that ecosystem adoption of promises and third-party packages is important. Many packages still don't support promises themselves, and mixing them with promises is troublesome. And I'm going to just take this moment. Well, no, I'm not going to take this moment. I'm just going to copy and paste that in. Okay.
Okay, so I think we should try and move on to other issues in the agenda. I guess on this one, we've identified a few possible alternatives, as well as if we could find a volunteer to sort of champion the discussion to, like, you know, bring it to like Rich was suggesting, taking it offline through email or whatever to see if we can get consensus across the TSC. Otherwise, we'll leave it on the agenda till next week is the last thing.
And if this is a you know, a super important issue, and perhaps it is, you know, it might warrant creating a small working group of motivated people to, you know, frequently talk about this and figure it out. Sounds like no fun to me, but yeah. Anyway, let's move on to the next topic. I'll stop.
Yep. Okay. So we'll leave it on the agenda. If somebody has time to volunteer to try and, you know, push it forward before the next meeting by reaching out to individuals, we can do that. Otherwise, hopefully we'll have a different mix, and, you know, eventually we'll cover off everybody. So we'll move on to the next issue, which is HTTP significant performance regression on master. I noticed, Matteo,
It's mostly resolved, so probably nothing to be done right now here.
Okay.
I just wanted to call in if you see that there is code that might potentially affect the performance of HTTP, event emitter, streams, debug log, and some other really small, like really internal part of Node Core, to make sure to run the benchmarks before we actually call it a day, before landing, because those it would have been possible to spot most of those regressions.
Is this something we should add to like a pre-release checklist to run these benchmarks?
There is already a lot of work done on pre-release, so at that point it's too late from my point of view. Like, it's not the release team responsibility to run benchmarks. So
yeah, I think we've had a long discussion on benchmarks, and even like trying to run these kind of ones more regularly, and they just take so long that I think we're kind of left to, unless somebody, and we decharted the benchmarking team, it's left as like people need to run the ones they think will affect the code that's changing, versus being able to run them all and run them on a regular basis, unfortunately.
Yeah, running on pre-release is a really good idea, but we need somebody who are not the releasers to do it.
Well, even running them all is like days. Like we've looked at them, and, you know, when the benchmarking work group was active, several people sort of said, "Oh, you know, we'll take a look at, can we find a subset that's useful and all that," and we just didn't make any progress on that, unfortunately.
Yeah, one of the reasons is the way the benchmarks are written. So right now, it's not possible to just run all of them properly. without having them run for at least a week or something like that. We discussed it to run benchmarks before releases, but this was mainly like okay, if you find the time to do it, just do it. But otherwise, it's difficult to really put that extra work towards the release group. I would not do that.
Is one possible alternative that the release group pinks, for example, Node.js streams and Node.js HTTP, and then one of the members, I mean, a member of both of those, could run the benchmarks and just give a heads up, or just so we don't forget or get into this kind of, because now we were lucky that Matteo was doing the benchmarks, but that was luck, I would guess.
When it comes to these regressions, I've seen multiple cases where it was actually about primordials being used. And this is something I would like to discuss in general a little bit more again, because these are really difficult to spot otherwise, because it's just like not really obvious that we have a performance decrease when just switching the code to primordials. But this has happened so often that I personally fear we might just have reduced our performance in multiple cases without noticing.
Absolutely. I am in total agreement with you, Ruben. The key problem here is that people with knowledge of those subsystems are not being tagged into the Primordials PR. So it's that is more or less, that's the reason. I'm putting the reason on that. Okay, I asked to be added and people were not doing it anyway. So
yeah, but it's not only about streams, you know, it's like lots of areas in our code base is performance sensitive. Even if you just have a look at something like util with util inspect, it's synchronous code. You want to have as little performance overhead as possible. And still we change all of this code to primordials without thinking about the performance overhead.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I agree. Yes.
Honestly speaking, I still do not see any benefit in using primordials, because if you have any program out there running, you will have a lot of external code that is not using primordials, and you will be able to mutate those this code base. So it's really, we obfuscate our code. It's more difficult for people to start over, and most code that we change at the current time is that code is rewritten to primordials without bringing an actual benefit to our user base, and this is something I see critical.
That sounds like a separate issue we should open and have you know, for the TSC discussion.
Yeah, I'll open an issue about that later on.
Because if we've seen multiple repeated instances of this causing problems, it seems like, you know, it's a good thing to discuss, and maybe we should have like a higher bar for anything that does that, right? Like in terms of running the benchmarks or more TSC approvals, to make sure that we do have people looking to see if the right teams have been mentioned, if that's not happening. But that's probably something.
Another thing to consider is that primordials have started off as this thing that like only people who knew how, you know, the very, very internal stuff was working, they would be implementing. And so they would know to check for performance because they knew that, you know, and then it sort of became this thing that was like, oh, this is almost like a good first issue because it's rote, it's mechanical. And it's really not. There's like a lot, you know, I mean, you know, I've certainly, you know, blown up that landmine myself. No, you know, no disrespect to anybody who does, but you know, yeah, a lot more care and attention needs to be paid to those PRs. A lot more review, and I don't know that we have the volunteers to really do that. And so so I do think that's a good issue to discuss separate from this issue. And yeah, I think you should open that up, Ruben. That'd be great.
Okay, anything more to discuss on this one before we move to the next issue then? If not, we'll move on to 37408, which is refactor timeout, immediate list, and timer class. I'm just going to see agenda. So Rich, you added that to the agenda. I see you're just mentioning to make sure it gets more attention. If it doesn't, hasn't gotten anybody to the next TSC meeting, I see there's 4 TSC approvals, which is probably what it needs to land, right?
Yep, this is for visibility.
Okay.
Because you know, some were out of caution, and but also timers, hot stove. You know, we should be careful with it. So actually, this is probably one that we should probably run a benchmark on. I think we did though. Yeah, we did. It's up there. Yep.
Okay. Going to since it's going, so I can remove it from the agenda at this point.
Yes, I'll untag the issue right now if you want to
Okay.
take a minute.
Sure, will do. Going to. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one, DEPS add yarn 1.22.5. That one we discussed a couple weeks ago. The sort of next steps is we were waiting for a volunteer who would potentially run a survey to gather more information about usage and need and so forth in the community, because that was brought up by some TSC members last time. Rich, you also mentioned you might be using it as sort of a initial change for a RFC type process. I don't know if you have an update on that.
Yeah, I'd still like to do that, but I obviously have not put in the time necessary to make that happen. So I think either we need to decide that this is a decision that can wait, or we need to, I think last meeting I was in, we were talking about if we don't have progress in a couple of weeks, we would just take a vote or something like that. I hate to see that happen, but I hate even more to just see this issue stay open for a year and have no resolution.
Right, and I'm just looking 7 days ago. Oh, wait a sec, that's not right. I'm pretty sure that, well, that's exactly the recollection from the last meeting that I had, is like, we basically said, if it looks like one of those two things are gonna happen, we'll hold off, but otherwise we should just call a vote. And
what I would like to do is since this is I would like to give an opportunity to people who maybe don't talk as much as you and I do in these meetings to elaborate on their opinions on this if they have any. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to just sort of like actually call on people who haven't said much this meeting. Like I know Danielle has not spoken, so I kind of want to know if she has an opinion on yarn and bundling yarn or not, especially since she's a releaser.
Yeah, I actually, I was interested in listening to the comments on this issue because I've been following it. So in my opinion, as a user, I think that it would be great if it was bundled, if Node was bundled with some version of yarn, just to make kind of like that initial usage a little bit easier. But as a platform maintainer, I'm less in support of it because I think it just kind of like adds another, first of all, there's already a package manager that's bundled with yarn. And then also, I think just like I get messages, or I get kind of like comments all the time with people, people that are using Node on Heroku, that they're kind of like, oh, well, like my, they've been like digging through the binary and they're like, oh, like, do I need this? Is there any way I can like take this part out? And so there's just like, I think like floating it would be an issue for users, but I don't know. I think as a user, I would actually like to see like a little bit less friction if I was trying to use yarn.
So you see it both ways.
Helpful. Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know if that was helpful.
Let's try Tobias.
I mean, ideally, we'd have a separate core and a separate standard library and separate NPM and separate yarn, right? And then maybe some distributions for convenience. I don't really have an opinion on including yarn. It might be convenient for some people, just like NPM is convenient for many people, and it might be better for some people to only have Node without any package managers, maybe for embedded systems. There's always the option to build from scratch. You can always download the binaries without any package manager. So if it's convenient, then why not include it? And that's completely leaving out the aspect of the additional work for releases.
Yeah, the why not is like, I know NPM is a decent source of reasons why we have to do a security updates in terms of dependencies. So adding another tree of dependencies is something I wouldn't be looking forward to.
That is a good point.
For me, it's like, yeah, it comes, that's one of the key things, is like, it's something that I think would cause us more security releases, just because there's more surface area, and you know, the trade-off is an npm install yarn, right? Which I know is an extra step, but doesn't seem to me like a huge step.
So is it fair to say that all the current contentions, pros and cons, or positives and negatives, can be abstracted to a single sentence to be a trade-off between fairness and maintenance burden?
I think you've hit the nail. Like, you basically put the point on what's really the key issue here versus the technical side of things, because we often get into the like, well, technically it would be useful or whatever, but in the end, I think it's around the, hey, one is in there and one isn't, is what ends up driving this, versus the technical issues a lot of the time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if we all agree that on one side we want to be fair, but then that implies a lot of complexities technically in terms of maintaining that. Isn't it the question boiling down to what do we care for as a community? And if we get the answer straight, we get the answer for this question as well. I know it's not that straightforward, but probably these kinds of questions can arise again in the future. I mean, a trade-off where essentially the answer lies in the question of what exactly the community put itself for the priority.
That's a good segue into Beth's comment in the chat, which I'm going to read for the benefit of streamers and people watching the recording, which is, my main thought is it doesn't seem fair to hold it up on a survey. That seems like a lot of hoops we're asking the contributors to go through to have their PR considered. Because of that, I'd be +1 for it to go to a vote, so it leads to a resolution. But in contrast, Girish's point seems, if I'm understanding correctly, is that the crux of the issue is, what does the community get out of us bundling yarn? How much benefit or opposite of benefit, for that matter, would they get out of us bundling yarn? And we don't really know that without consulting the community, is what I think you're trying to say, Girish. Is that correct?
Yeah, kind of. On the other hand, the community also take some responsibility on its shoulders to say what, as a set of people in the community, what exactly are our priorities when it comes to the node.js project to the wider ecosystem. So is it that we want to be seen as fair for in terms of the NPM registry vendors, versus we want to be seen as a stable piece of platform which is coherent, minimal core, and well maintained, well security maintained, and well functionally maintained.
Yeah, and I think my related concern to that is, once you start including multiples of the same thing, where do you stop? Right? Like, okay, if you say, well, it's fair to have the second one in, well, what about the third one and the fourth one? And then what about Michael's package manager, right? That's a potentially slippery slope.
Pandora's box.
Yeah, versus a technical, like if it's for that reason versus a technical benefit or a true value to the end users, you know, that lets them, you know, if it's huge, it's kind of like if it's just so that, you know, it's on that dimension, then yeah, where do you stop? And then we've got like 5 more sets of dependencies we have to support and do security releases of because and so forth, right?
So what we discussed before was not to include in different package managers, but maybe even to remove NPM and to just add a bash script, which would allow users to install on demand any package manager they would care about. And this would still be my favorite way of doing it, because we should also always put the convenience for the users as top priority. And in this case, they would be able to install whatever a manager they would like. And still, we don't have to maintain a lot of code. It's just a tiny install script, and then people could choose. We would have to still and decide on what package managers would be allowed to be added to such install script. For example, Michael's package manager, as you just said, would probably not be a good one, because we would have to have like a minimum bar of usage out there in the community. And that would probably be a good way of handling it out of my perspective.
Right, and that's where, like, back to, you know, I kind of agree with Beth at this point, that like saying we won't do anything until there's a survey. A survey is a bit of a bar. I'd also personally think it, you know, if we don't have enough information to say it's the right thing, I'm comfortable saying, well, no, not that we never would, but that no, that we don't have enough information, and so given a vote, that's going to be the answer. So it's, you know, I'm leaning towards the, unless we have, you know, somebody who's volunteered to be the champion to lead that from the TSC, right? So it shouldn't be back to the proposers, or you know, Rich, if you were going to like, well, next week we'll have an RFC process, so let's do that. If that's going to drag out, you know, I'm still back to like, we should maybe just vote on this particular PR. I mean, there's been like you know, Ruben mentioned, there's been alternatives, and it seems to be like all sorts of different things are being tried in terms of PRs and suggestions and whatever. You know, and maybe it's up to the TSC to just say, look, we don't have enough information to say yes on this, or yes, we do, right? Like, and
I mean, I do like the ship a package manager suggestion that, you know, has been made in the past and that Ruben just brought up again. But like the one thing that gives me so much pause about that is that it you know, that one extra step of having to install a package manager just increases, you know, it just will break so many workflows, automated and otherwise.
That particular proposal was not to remove NPM. It
Right.
was to leave NPM as is and add the extra functionality to make it a little bit easier to install the other ones.
I mean, I don't know. The thing is, I don't know that like including our own tool to install Yarn is really that much different than telling people to type npm install the Yarn.
That's, you know, where I get back to, like, I don't see the bar for installing it as that hard, right? So
okay, Mateo's got his hand up and has been trying to say something. So let's.
I just want to say that we have there was this tool called Corpac being built. I can remember the story about it, but I don't know why we are not actually landing this that will solve the problem.
That might be what Ruben was talking about, or
yeah, it's the same thing. Yes. Yeah.
So it seems done. So I don't know. I'm just wondering if somebody, if this is done, then maybe we can just ship this. And I don't know. Like, I would prefer to ship this essentially.
I think so. That's like, I don't think there was consensus. So maybe we would need a separate discussion on the other one. Is there an existing PR for that? I know we agreed to move it into the into the organization to sort of basically incubate it. But I'm not sure I remember a PR to bring that into core since then.
And I think that that's just extra overhead. I mean, I could be wrong, but I mean, NPM doesn't exist in our, isn't in our org either, you know, and we bundle it, and Yarn's not gonna, but Beth just commented, does it make sense for the TSC to vote on both pull requests? I don't know that there is a pull request for core pack, but certainly we could just say, does it make sense for the TSC to vote on both proposals, bundle Yarn, bundle core pack?
That would make sense to me, right? Like in terms of, and maybe, I don't know how we would rank. Like I'm thinking there could be people who would be like, well, I'd prefer neither, but if you're going to do one, this is the one I prefer, right? Like, so if we could come up with a strategy to extract that.
So this is a you know, big. This is an issue that a lot of people are likely to have opinions on. So I do want to, the two people we haven't heard from, I want to just make sure they have an opportunity to weigh in if they have anything to say, would be Nikita and Robert.
Well, my opinion is if you're adding more package managers just for fairness sake, then it's better to remove NPM if that's the core issue, because it's really a Pandora's box there, as Michael mentioned. If you include one, what's the clear bar that another package manager has to pass for that also to be included? So a package manager is, I guess, a compromise.
So does it mean that the security issues that we talked about is now transferred or delegated to the package manager or the target module brings in the security posture along with the lifecycle management of the module? How does it work?
It would seem like it, yeah.
To be honest, if we are
just like someone's using a package, if someone's using, you know, Lodash and there's a vulnerability, it's on them to open it, to update it. Similarly, if someone's using Yarn or NPM, it's on them to update it. Go ahead, Mateo.
Sorry, but the core pack, which is the thing that will be our packet manager loader, is literally it has no dependency. So there's nothing.
Nikita, did you? Good. Good.
So yeah, that's it.
Good.
So it has no dependency. So because it has no runtime dependencies, as it has no runtime dependencies, not a problem. It will have some dev dependencies. That is true.
Okay.
I guess the only question related to that, and I don't remember, is like, do we take any responsibility if it makes it look like Node is installed it for them versus the NPM dash? Like we're basically replacing the, hey, I'm going to do NPM dash whatever Yarn with, I think you just type Yarn and it will automatically install it for you. So somebody may not even know that it was installed. It could look like it's part of Node. And do we take any responsibility having done that versus the owner having done and, you know, installed themselves?
Nikita, did you have anything you wanted to add to this topic? And it's okay if you don't.
So I guess, are we agreed to call for a vote? Sorry, go ahead.
I'd like to GitHub discussion, I think. Nothing specific.
Okay, so maybe what I can do is I'll take the action to open an issue, basically saying we discussed calling, you know, taking this to a vote in the TSC repo, and that can give people a place to comment and, you know, if they have any concerns about doing that. we can discuss it there. Does that make sense?
So I'm sorry, you're taking an action item to open.
Yeah, I'll take the action item to open an issue in the TSC repo saying, we discussed in the recent meeting moving this to a vote. Do any other TSC members have comments, concerns, and so forth in us doing that?
I would recommend trying to resume the core pack PR before we do that.
So the issue Michael would open would be about both core pack and bundling yarn. Is that right, Michael?
I can add the suggestion was made that the vote should include covering those two.
Yeah,
does that cover your concern?
Yeah, exactly. Like again, it's for me, it's either one of them or none. So it's not a yes no. Is
right? Yeah, I'll try and come up with a question, like a set of questions that I would post in there to say like a vote, and here's some proposed questions that would try and get that that subtlety and like even like the preferences, because there can be different preferences in there.
All right,
okay, so we're actually only have 5 minutes left. So we have a number of issues, and I know there was private business as well. So I think we should look at what's left on the agenda and ask if there's anything we absolutely have to talk about today, or otherwise move into our private session. If I look at them, TLS improve compliance with shutdown standard remove hacks. I know that's been on the agenda for a while. Does anybody know that we need to talk about that?
So I just looked through all of them. I don't think there's anything that is urgent for this week.
Okay.
Does anybody have any? Oh, Nikita put his yarn comment in here. He's against bundling yarn directly, but in favor of a script to install package manager. Okay, I'll make a note of that in the minutes.
Okay, so yeah, okay. So anybody else have looked at the issues? Anything that we do absolutely need to talk about this week? The only one I'll mention is please everybody go and update your meeting availability in terms of the meeting times, because we want to revise the meeting times based on that soon. Otherwise, thanks to